Okay, so it's important that we start to go over some of the basics. So as you're going through these lessons, if I start to get a bit theoretical, I don't have to keep going over these basics as we go. So this is a pretty important lesson to watch. If you feel like you're a late stages of intermediate player or advanced, you might be able to skip this, but it couldn't hurt to watch it anyway just to make sure that all the gaps of knowledge, so to speak, are filled in before you start this course. So let's get through it. First, I just want to talk about what we are mainly going to be discussing, which is a 2-5-1 chord progression in a major key. And we are going to address minor keys as well too, but it's a little bit easier to start with major, and we have lots of concepts that can apply to both. So what do I mean by all this? Let's start with a major scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C is our C major scale. And we have scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 available. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, in other words. If I was to build a chord off of each of those notes by skipping notes 2 times and staying true to the scale, not playing any sharps or flats that don't exist in the scale. So in the case of C major, I have to stay on white notes. We have what's called a 1 chord, a 2 chord, a 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, and 7 chord. In every major scale, that amounts to a major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. From there, we can add an extra skip. We get major seventh, right? So now a major chord with a semitone away from the octave is going to be a major seventh chord. Our 2 chord is minor seventh, which is a minor chord with a minor seventh, which is a tone away from the octave. We have another minor seventh, another major seventh, a dominant seventh, which is a major chord with a minor seventh on top, a tone away from our octave. A minor seventh, and then a half diminished chord, often referred to as minor 7 flat 5. It's called this because it's very similar to a minor 7th chord, but the 5th is flattened. In terms of it being called a half diminished 7th chord, think of it this way. A fully diminished 7th chord is built of minor thirds only, 3 semitones at a time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And this interval, B to A flat, is called a diminished 7th. Why? Well, B to A sharp is a major 7th, B to A is a minor 7th, so if I'm not calling this note a G sharp, if I'm calling it an A flat, B to A is automatically going to be some type of 7th, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. But what type of 7th are we going to call it? Well, if it's 1 semitone lower than a minor 7th, it's called a diminished 7th. So if this is a fully diminished 7th chord, what we have is a diminished chord with a minor 7th. So it's called half diminished 7th. A lot of us prefer minor 7 flat 5 just because it really spells out what's happening a little bit more clearly. It's a minor 7 chord, but the 5th has been flattened. So our focus for most of this course is going to be on a regular old 2, 5, 1 chord progression. So you get minor 7, dominant 7, and then major 7. Now, often I'll use inversions. So the 2 might be root position. The 5 chord is going to have all the same notes, but the D and F are probably going to be moved down to the bottom quite frequently. And then we have a 1 chord. I'm not saying that these voicings are the best voicings to use for a 2-5-1 chord progression, but for the sake of keeping things simple within the lesson, I think it's going to be relatively straightforward. So that covers our 2-5-1 chord progression. Now, I want to quickly talk about something that I'm not actually going to be explaining in depth within the course, but it's worth knowing. And that is the modes, in other words, the scales, that we play over top of each of these chords. So I'll go through it and explain what's happening, and feel free to do extra research on these 3 modes as well, but the tricks that I'm going to be showing you are going to give you so much mileage that everyone else that's playing this stuff, this regular old Dorian mode, Lydian mode, they're great modes, they're great scales, but you're going to have a lot more tools to work with. So let's talk about it. D minor 7, we're going to use D Dorian, which is a natural minor scale, right? In this case, D natural minor would have a B flat, but we're going to play it with a major 6th. So from our major scale, we would have B in D major, right? So we're going to take that B and change the B flat to a B. So what we get on the bottom part of the scale is very minor sounding, but at the top, it's a little bit more major and bright sounding. So the Dorian mode offers a lot of emotional shades, which is why I really like it. Next, we have over our 5 chord, the Lydian mode. In this case, it is a major scale, but with a minor 7 or flat 7, which accommodates our chord. Because remember, a dominant chord is a major chord with a flat 7. So it's a lot like a G major scale, but instead of an F sharp, we're going to play an F natural. So you're going to need to know your major scales, and I would recommend practice all your major scales, natural, harmonic, and melodic minor scales before you really dig into a lot of this stuff. If you're a classical player beforehand, that can help. If not, just start off by focusing on major and natural minor, and then progress from there. So you can do this over any chord. So here's A major 7, 1, 3, 5, and 7 of our A major scale. If I flatten the 7th, I get A dominant 7th, and I'll take that major scale and flatten the G sharp down to a G. Okay, so that's your dominant chord, major scale with a flat 7, and then when we come to our 1 chord, you just use a regular old major scale. It's kind of boring, so I'm going to give you a lot of other options as well too, but I should say that if you play the major scale the right way, it shouldn't sound boring. It's just a little bit harder to finagle, where when you're a beginner player, it doesn't sound cheesy and kind of overly happy. But what I would recommend is if you are going to use that major scale, try to resolve your lines on something a little bit adventurous, maybe like the D, which is the 9th, or the A, which is the 13, or 6 in this case. So what am I talking about? 9, 13, blah, we should probably decode some of that stuff as well too. So our scale, back to it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, has 7 notes, and then once we get to 8, we're repeating our first note again. It's the octave. But if I keep going, I could call this note a 9, which is the same as 2. 11 is the same as 4, and 13 is the same as 6. Over a dominant chord, you'll often hear these 9s, 11s, and 13s. Over a major chord, you'll often hear 9 and 6. The 11 you'll normally hear as a sharp 11. It's rare to see a major chord with a regular 11. The reason being that F in this case is clashing with E in my left hand. It's like I'm playing this, but just separating a bit. It's still quite nasty sounding. So normally we'll end up playing something called the Lydian mode. It's not, I want to backpedal just for a second. It's not uncommon over your 1 chord, if it's major, to play the Lydian mode. Some say it's even brighter sounding than the major scale, and it just gives a little bit more color. So if we have a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, we need to raise our 4th scale degree. So we end up getting an F sharp and getting some really cool sounds out of that. Now, we could go through all the different church modes. I don't think that that's necessarily what we need to do, but again, I just want to make sure that all the cracks are filled out. So let's go through it relatively fast. And of course, this is recorded, so you can go back and continually check it out. But you have the main ones: Dorian over a 2, Mixolydian over your 5, and Ionian or major over your 1. And of course, the Lydian with that sharp 4 also works as well too. I think it's important that we go through all the different church modes that relate to each of those chords, so let's tackle those quickly. We have a major scale built off of number 1 called Ionian. We have a natural minor scale with a raised 6th over our 2 chord, which is called Dorian. We have a natural minor scale with a flat 2, so here's E minor, here's E Phrygian, right? So natural minor with a flat 2. Lydian is a major scale with a sharp 4. Mixolydian is a major scale with a flat 7. Aeolian is natural minor. And then we have Locrian, which is a natural minor with a flat 2 and flat 5. What you're going to want to know the most is the Dorian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Lydian, and Ionian, I suppose, the major scale. It's a great place to start, but we're going to want to explore the colors of those other modes probably a little bit more than our basic old major scale. So as I mentioned before, we take the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th note of a major scale to get a major 7th chord. If I then add anything past the 8, we're up to scale degree 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 9, 11, 13 is the same as 2, 4, and 6. In some instances, we'll call them 2, 4, and 6. In other cases, we'll call them 9, 11, and 13. Over a major chord, what you'll hear is 9 and 6, and the 11 is normally going to be a sharp 11. It's normally going to be leaning towards that Lydian sound, because when you have a major 7th chord with a regular 11, the major 3rd and that 11 are going to end up clashing. Over a minor 7th chord, we're going to have 9, 11, and 13 or 6. Different people have different preferences. But what I can tell you for sure is also over a dominant chord, you're going to hear those upper extensions used. 9, 11, and 13 as opposed to 2, 4, and 6. So if you want to know more about when to name a chord based on the lower numbers, 2, 4, 6, or the higher numbers, 9, 11, 13, I would recommend check out the Jazz Piano Book by Mark Levine. But it's a doozy, there's a lot to sift through, and my hope is that this course gives you a lot of really great stuff to start with, almost sort of like jazz paint by numbers. A lot of tricks that to you will eventually seem easy, but to your listener, it's going to get them to twist their ear a bit and go, whoa, what's he or she doing in that moment? So yeah, I would recommend learn your major scale, learn your natural minor scale, and then those other modes that we talked about are super important. Lydian, Dorian, Mixolydian, and again, Ionian is major and Aeolian is natural minor. Now, there's a lot of crazy words there. I bet you're getting fed up with it. Maybe not, but maybe. So, repeat after me. I don't friggin' like music any longer. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. I learned that in high school, so hopefully that helps you guys. It's like just a little easy cheat to remember. So I is Ionian, don't is Dorian, friggin is Phrygian, like is Lydian, music is Mixolydian, any is Aeolian, and Locrian would be longer. I don't friggin' like music any longer. So there it is. We talked about our 2-5-1 chord progression. We talked about the Dorian mode over 2, Mixolydian over 5, and the major scale over 1 or the Lydian scale over 1. In terms of the minor 2-5-1, on the 1 chord, you'll have a few different options. The 2 and the 5 can be a bit more complex, so check out the lesson titled Locrian Sharp 2 and Altered Scales, because that's the one that's going to show you what to play in that more complex atmosphere of a minor 2-5-1 chord progression. But I think we've covered the basics to help you just kind of hit the ground running with a lot of these lessons, and you don't have to go through them in order either. I mean, quite often I'm doing little throwbacks, like in the last lesson we talked about this, but really you can go through them in whatever order interests you the most. So if there's a certain topic that you've heard of before and you see that one of the lessons is on that topic, start there. I want to snare your interest. I want you to have enough ambition and passion behind this that you actually practice it, you really internalize it, and you can use it properly. So that's it for our basic introductory lesson. Hopefully I covered everything that we need to. There's so many basic elements in music that it's like, where do we start? We could talk about a semitone being 2 notes beside each other, or a tone having 1 note in between, but it would be a very extensive lesson for us to have right now if I was to cover all of music theory. So I think I've given you all the information that you're going to need to know to get through the rest of this course so that any little gaps in your knowledge might be able to be filled out by this lesson here. Josh, stop talking about the basics. Let's get into the fun stuff. Okay, let's go.